take off that ridiculous necklace, Commander, and the rest of it. Every medal on that coat. You will unpin them one by one and set them on the rail where the members can see they mean nothing in my courtroom." Captain Douglas Thorne did not raise his voice. He never did. He let the words fall from the bench like a man dropping stones into still water, watching the rings spread, satisfied by his own reach. 55 years old, 29 of them in the Judge Advocate General's Corps. A face built for disapproval, and a courtroom he ran like a private estate. Behind him, the national ensign and the Navy flag hung dead in the recycled air. In front of him, at the defense table, a woman in service dress blue rose to her feet. She did not argue. That was the first thing anyone should have noticed, and almost no one did. Commander Eleanor Sinclair, 42 years old, stood the way a piling stands in a running tide, planted, unbothered, indifferent to the water trying to move it. Her hands were quiet at her sides. Her eyes went once around the room. The two doors, the bailiff's hands, the members' box. 7 officers in a row, already leaning toward a verdict. The gallery behind her, half empty. A scatter of old men in the back rows in civilian coats that did not fit the way they used to. She read all of it in the space of a breath, the way some people read a page, and then she reached up and began to unpin her medals. One clasp, then another. No wasted motion. Each ribbon came free clean, and she laid it on the wooden rail in front of the table in a straight, exact line, spacing them the way a person spaces tools on a bench. In the back row, an old man with a chief's forearm stopped breathing. There were maybe 9 of them scattered through the gallery, men in their 60s and 70s, in sport coats gone soft at the elbows, the kind who show up early and sit in the back and say nothing. They had been there every day, and Thorne had never once looked at them. If he had, he might have wondered why 9 strangers kept driving in to watch a routine dereliction case, and why they all sat the same way, spines off the seat backs, feet flat, hands on knees, like men who had spent a lifetime being told to stand by. He did not wonder. He was watching the medals come off the coat, and he was enjoying it. Lieutenant Caleb Ellsworth started to stand. 29 years old, 3 years in the JAG Corps, and assigned to defend a client the entire building had already convicted. Your Honor, the accused's decorations are a matter of service record, and I object to— Sit down, Lieutenant. Thorne did not look at him. You'll speak when the court wants noise from you. Ellsworth sat, but he watched his client's hands, and what he saw made the hair on his arms lift. There was no tremor in them. None. He had defended men accused of far less who shook so hard they could not sign their own names, and this woman was disassembling the proudest thing on her uniform with the steady, economical patience of someone field stripping a rifle. He glanced back at the old men in the gallery. Every one of them had gone rigid. The last thing to come off was not pinned to her chest. She reached up with both hands and lifted a light blue ribbon from around her neck, a moiré band, the color of a shallow sea, dotted with 13 small white stars, and hung from it, heavy, a 5-pointed star of its own. She lifted it over her head the way you lift something off a grave. For a moment it swung, catching the courtroom light. Then she set it on the rail, apart from the others, and took her hand away. The Medal of Honor lay alone on the wood. There are perhaps 3,500 names on the roll of that decoration in the whole history of the country. Fewer than 70 of those people were still drawing breath. Captain Douglas Thorne had just ordered one of them to take it off and put it down like a coat. Yes, Your Honor, Sinclair said, 3 syllables. Nothing else. Her voice was low and even and entirely without heat, and it was somehow the loudest thing that had been said in that room all morning. Thorne nodded, pleased, and made a note. He did not understand what was lying on the rail 6 feet from his bench. Neither did the members, neither did the prosecutor. Only 2 people in the entire courtroom understood the size of what had just been set down on that piece of varnished oak, the woman who had earned it, and the pale young lieutenant at the defense table who had just realized he had no idea who he was sitting next to. She sat back down. She squared her chair to the bench, set her hands flat on the table, and became still again. Not the tight stillness of a person holding themselves together, but the loose, banked stillness of a person conserving something. Ellsworth had read her file 100 times. 20 years of service. A string of assignments with unit names blacked out. A gap of 11 months in 2019 where the record simply said, operational. He had assumed, the way overworked defense counsel assume, that the gap was where the trouble was. Watching her hands lie flat and quiet on the table, he began to understand that the gap was not where the trouble was. The gap was where the answer was. And someone had gone to a great deal of effort to make sure it stayed blacked out. The government had a clean story, and Lieutenant Commander Paige Alcott told it cleanly. She was 36, sharp, careful, the kind of trial counsel who did not raise her voice because her facts were supposed to do it for her. She stood before the members with a single sheet of paper she did not need and laid out the theory of the case in 3 sentences a child could follow. The government's position is simple, she said. In the early hours of a night in 2019, an order was given by a superior officer. The accused refused it. And because she refused it, a sailor under her charge is dead. That is dereliction. That is disobedience. That is a life. The evidence will show all 3. It was a good opening. It had the terrible tidiness of a thing that has been rehearsed until the seams disappear. In the members' box, 2 of the 7 officers wrote something down, and Ellsworth felt the trial slide another inch away from him. But he had spent 3 years learning to listen for the note under the note, and there was one here. Alcott's story was clean the way a thing is clean when someone has cleaned it. An order given. An order refused. A man dead. 3 beats, each one true on its own, arranged so that a person hearing them fast would assemble the wrong picture out of the right pieces. Ellsworth wrote in the margin of his pad. What was the order? Not whether she refused it. What it actually was. The government's whole case depended on the members never wondering that, on the word order, doing all the work, carrying its own weight of rightness, so that refusing it became the crime, and the content of it never came up. Alcott had said the word 4 times in 3 sentences. Ellsworth counted. 4. A person confident in the order itself does not need to say it 4 times. Then the government called its first technical witness, and the tidiness developed a hairline crack. The witness was an ordnance specialist, brought to explain to the members what a vessel-borne improvised explosive device was and how the one at the center of the case had been rigged. He was competent. He was also, Ellsworth realized, watching the wrong table for reassurance. Twice, mid-answer, the man's eyes flicked toward the accused, not toward the prosecutor who had called him, as if checking his work against a higher authority. On cross, Ellsworth, half blind and improvising, asked the witness how much time there would have been between initiation and detonation on a charge of that configuration. The witness hesitated. It would depend on 11 seconds, Sinclair said quietly, without being asked. For that initiator, on that main charge, at that temperature. 11 seconds from the moment the circuit closed. Not 12. Not 10. The room went still. She had not been called. She had simply corrected the record because it was wrong, the way a person straightens a picture on someone else's wall without thinking about it. The ordnance witness looked at her and nodded before he could stop himself. Yes. 11. It was a small thing, that number. It was also the entire case. if anyone had been listening for it. 11 seconds. That was how long there would have been between a scuttling charge sensing a breach and the main initiator finishing the vessel. 11 seconds was not enough time to get 11 people out of a forward hold. Anyone who had ever stood on a real deck knew that. The order the government kept calling lawful had been an order to spend 11 lives to save the trouble of a harder plan. And the woman at the defense table had known the exact arithmetic of it, to the second, because she had been the one standing in the 11 seconds. The witness had felt it. That was why he nodded. He had recognized, for one instant, that the most qualified explosive ordnance authority in the room was the person on trial. Thorne rapped his pen. "The accused will not testify from her chair." "No, Your Honor," she said. And she folded her hands and went back to reading the room, the exits, the bailiff, the members, in that order. Always in that order. Faces last. While the ordnance man stepped down looking like a boy who had been quietly graded by his own teacher. Ellsworth glanced at Alcott, and for 1/2 second, before she smoothed it away, the prosecutor's certainty wobbled. Just a flicker. The look of someone who has been handed a clean file and is starting to smell something underneath the paper. Ellsworth wrote one word on his legal pad. He underlined it twice. Classified. By the second day, the courtroom had stopped pretending. Every objection the government made, Thorne sustained. Every objection the defense made, he overruled, and he did it with a little downward turn of the mouth, as though Ellsworth's attempts to defend his client were a small mess someone kept making on his clean floor. The members watched the pattern the way jurors always do, and they drew the conclusion the pattern was built to make them draw. If the judge treated her like she was guilty, she must be guilty. Contempt is contagious in a closed room, and Thorne was spreading it on purpose. At the mid-morning recess, it spilled into the corridor. Sinclair walked out into the marble hall to the water fountain, and a knot of junior officers by the window did not lower their voices. "That's her," one said. "The one playing dress-up. Whole chest full of hardware, and she still couldn't follow one order." A staffer laughed. Somebody said something about costume jewelry. Sinclair filled a paper cup, drank it, set it in the bin. She did not turn her head. Her stillness was so complete that the little group actually faltered, the way people falter when a thing they expected to flinch simply does not. One of them, a young officer with a fresh haircut and a loud watch, kept talking a beat too long, the way a man keeps swinging after the bell because he needs the crowd to see him land something. She let him talk. She did not give him the flinch he was fishing for. After a while, the not getting it wore the group down, and they drifted off toward the elevators, quieter than they had come, unsettled, and not sure why. What none of them saw was that she was working. Ellsworth saw it. He watched her take a plain index card and a pen from her breast pocket, the breast pocket that used to hold a medal, and write in small block letters 3 lines. A name, a time, a room number. She wasn't brooding. She was building a record. Who had said what? When, and in front of whom? He had watched a lot of clients in a lot of corridors, and every one of them, in that moment of being mocked, had done one of 2 things. They had crumpled, or they had raged. She did neither. She catalogued. She treated the contempt of the whole building as evidence. Dry, dated, filed, the way an ordnance tech treats a live device, without fear and without feeling, as a problem with a correct sequence of steps. She slid the card back into the empty pocket and turned to him with the calm of a woman filing paperwork. "They're handing you a trial you can't win," Ellsworth said. "Low, you understand that. The way he's running it, we lose." "It isn't finished," she said. 3 words, and there was something underneath them. Not hope, exactly, Certainty. The certainty of a person who knows a thing the room does not, and is content to wait for the room to catch up. If you have ever watched someone stay perfectly composed while a room full of people decided they already knew her and felt that particular ache of wanting the truth to walk through the door, then do this small thing before it does. Tap the subscribe button for Honor Tales. Every soldier in these stories carries something the room can't see, and staying subscribed is how you're there when the room finally learns what it was looking at. She slid the index card home into the empty pocket, straightened her coat, and walked back through the courtroom doors, not like a defendant returning to a dock, but like a watchstander returning to a post. On paper, she was losing badly. The government moved to admit a redacted copy of the 2019 after-action report. Alcott called it properly sanitized for open court. The version that landed in evidence had whole paragraphs blacked out. The paragraphs Ellsworth would have bet his commission, that held the shape of what actually happened on that freighter. The redactions did not protect a secret so much as they cut the tendons out of any defense. Thorne admitted it over objection in under a minute. Sinclair did not move. The report that gutted her case went up on the screen, and she watched it with the flat, even attention of a woman reading a tide table. No flush, no tightening, only the stillness, which by now Ellsworth had stopped reading as calm and started reading as control. The deliberate quiet of someone spending nothing she did not have to spend. That night, he did what the file told him not to do. He read it sideways. He cleared the floor of the front room and laid the entire charging chain out on it, page by page, in the order the paper had been generated rather than the order the government had presented it. That was the trick an old instructor had taught him. Do not read a case in the order someone wants you to read it. Read it in the order it was built. Things that look inevitable when you read them forward often look manufactured when you read them backward, and he wanted to see the seams. He pulled every document in the charging chain and laid them across his apartment floor and looked for the one thing that repeated. It was a signature. The convening authority's endorsements, the review board's referral, the timing memoranda. One name kept surfacing at the corner of the pages, sometimes as a reviewer, sometimes as an interested command. Then a captain. Now, per the letterhead, a rear admiral. Gordon Blaine. Ellsworth did not yet know what the name meant. He only knew that a flag officer's fingerprints were on every joint of the machine that was trying to convict his client, and that no one had put that flag officer on the witness list. A man that senior, that involved, and not called, not by the defense, which had been given no reason to know his name, and not by the government, which surely knew it, was not an oversight. You did not accidentally leave a rear admiral off the board of a case he had touched at every level. You left him off on purpose, because the case only worked as long as no one could ask him a question under oath. The whole architecture of the trial, Ellsworth began to see, was not built to prove a woman guilty. It was built to keep one man from ever being asked a single thing. The next morning, he leaned close to Sinclair before the members filed in. I have to ask you once, and you have to tell me straight. Did you disobey the order you're charged with disobeying? She turned her head a precise few degrees. When she answered, she corrected his verb the way she had corrected the ordnance witness, surgically, because precision was the only ground she trusted. I did not disobey an order, she said. I refused an unlawful one. There is a great deal of difference, Lieutenant, and every inch of it is on that freighter. I can't prove it in this room, not with those pages. Then tell me who can. Someone who was there, she said, and has the clearance to say so. Ellsworth looked back down at the charge sheet, at the name Blaine in the endorsement block, and for the first time the whole trial tilted under him, not toward his client's guilt, but toward the thing the court had been carefully built to bury. He stopped trusting the file that night and started trusting his eyes. He found one of the old chiefs from the back row in the parking structure, a heavy-set man of maybe 60, leaning on the fender of a truck, 2 decades out of warranty. Smoking a cigarette he clearly wasn't supposed to have. The man had been in the gallery every single day. Ellsworth had assumed he was somebody's uncle. "You keep coming," Ellsworth said. "Every day." "Why?" The chief studied him without hurry. He had a face like a piling, weathered and unbothered, and eyes that had clearly spent a career watching young officers arrive at conclusions the enlisted had reached an hour earlier. He let the silence sit until Ellsworth felt it. "You know why I retired to this town, Lieutenant?" the chief said finally. "No reason. Cheap, near the water." And then a few weeks back, a name shows up on a court-martial docket that gets passed around in certain circles, the way a name only gets passed around when the people passing it owe somebody something. He tipped his head toward the building. "So 9 of us drove in. We're not lawyers. We can't do a thing in that room. We came to sit where she could see us, that's all. So that whatever they did to her in there, she'd know she wasn't the only one in the room who knew what it was worth." He looked at Ellsworth for a long moment, measuring the uniform, the youth, the earnestness. Then he looked up at the concrete ceiling as if he could see through it to the courtroom. "You know what you've got sitting at that table, Lieutenant?" he said. "No, you don't. I can see you don't." He took a drag. "I never served with her. Wrong side of the fleet, wrong years. But I know the call sign. Everybody in the community knows the call sign. Riptide. And I know what men came home in 2019 who had no business coming home, and I know somebody scrubbed a captain's name off the reason why." "Blaine," Ellsworth said. The chief's eyes sharpened. "I didn't say that. I'm not a witness, son. I'm a warning." He crushed the cigarette under his boot. "You want my advice? You don't defend a woman like that. You get out of her way, and you keep the record clean, so that when somebody with enough weight finally walks through that door, there's a clean floor for them to stand on. That's not a defendant sitting at your table. That's the reason a dozen families still set an extra place at Thanksgiving." Ellsworth spent the rest of the night on the phone. He tried the Fleet Review Board and got a wall of no comment so smooth it felt engineered. He tried to find out when Sinclair had been scheduled to testify to that board and found that the charges had been referred 11 days before her scheduled appearance. 11 days. The charges had been timed. Someone had wanted her in a courtroom, discredited, before she could ever sit in front of that board and say what she knew. 11 days. He kept coming back to it. A man does not time a thing to the day unless the day matters. And that day mattered because on the far side of it, Eleanor Sinclair was going to sit in front of a board and tell the truth about 2019. Somebody had been willing to spend a Medal of Honor recipient's freedom to buy his own silence. Ellsworth sat in his car in the dark a long time with that, and something in him that had been going along to get along stood up and refused to sit back down. He understood then that he was not trying to win a trial anymore. He was trying to keep his client standing on the record, clean, calm, uncontradicted, long enough for someone with stars on their shoulders to arrive. If you were the kind of person who feels a story tighten right here, in the quiet before the door opens, stay with it and subscribe. What walks into that courtroom next is the whole reason Honor Tales exists. He went back to her with what he had. She neither confirmed nor denied a single piece of it. She only said, "Keep the record clean, Lieutenant, and be ready to stand up fast." Here is what the court could not be told, and what you can. 2019. A black sea. No moon. The water, the temperature of a held breath. A coastal freighter, old, rust-streaked, riding low, had been seized by a cell that had no intention of ransoming it. They had wired the hull. 11 crew were alive below decks, herded into the forward hold, and the vessel had been turned into a single enormous device with a harbor full of sleeping people at the end of its heading. Not a hijacking. A delivery. Then Lieutenant Commander Eleanor Sinclair led the explosive ordnance element that fast-roped onto the stern at 0200. Miles away, on a screen, Then Captain Gordon Blaine commanded the task force. And from that screen, reading a clock instead of a deck, Blaine gave an order. Assault the bridge and scuttle the vessel immediately before the cell could trigger it. It was a decision that made sense in a dark room full of monitors and made no sense at all standing on the actual steel. Scuttling meant charges. Charges meant the main initiator would sense the hull breach and finish the job the cell had started. 11 crew in the forward hold. 11 seconds. On the radio, Blaine's voice had the particular confidence of a man who is safe. He said the timeline was closing. He said assault and scuttle now, and he said it twice, because saying it twice was easier than being on the deck. He could not see what she could see. He could not see the freighter riding low and wrong, the way it only rides when the hull itself is the weapon. He could not see that scuttling a boat rigged like this one was not a way to stop the device. It was the device's own plan, wearing a Navy order for a hat. Sinclair countermanded the order on the deck, where the physics actually lived. "Belay the scuttle," she said into her radio, flat and clear, and she took her team forward instead of aft, toward the main charge instead of away from it. There is a kind of courage that is loud, and a kind that is only arithmetic, and hers was the second kind. She had run the numbers the instant she saw the waterline. The safe-looking order killed 11 people, and the terrifying one might save them. Once you have done that arithmetic, there is nothing left to be afraid of. There is only the work. She and Chief Petty Officer Daniel Sutter reached it in the forward hold. Danny Sutter, 31 years old, from a river town in the middle of the country, a man who had taught half the community how to breathe slow with their hands inside something that wanted to kill them. He knelt beside her at the charge and read it out while she worked, calling the wiring the way a corpsman calls a pulse. The hold was black and close and smelled of diesel and rust and fear. Somewhere forward, 11 crew were pressed into a compartment behind a door. Her breachers were working slow and quiet, so as not to jostle the very thing she had come to defuse. Every choice down here was two-sided. Cut fast and reassure the frightened men, or cut slow and keep them alive. She cut slow. She always cut slow. Her hands were exact. They were always exact. The render safe was a sequence of small, irreversible decisions made in the dark, each one measured, each one final, and she made them at the pace she always made them. No faster, because faster was how people died. Danny Sutter knelt at her shoulder with a red-lensed light and read the device out in a low, steady murmur. The wiring, the runs, the junctions, calling it like a corpsman calls a pulse. They had done this together in a dozen dark places. He never rushed her. He never once, in all those years, told her to hurry, because he understood the thing that the man on the radio did not. That hurry was the only enemy in the room that always won. Then a secondary initiator they had not seen began to run. There was time for one of two things. There was not time for both. And Chief Daniel Sutter, who had a wife and a daughter, and a truck he was always fixing, did the arithmetic in the quarter second it took him to move, and he put his body between the charge and his officer. "Cut the gannion, ma'am," he said. His voice was steady. That was the thing she would carry, how steady it was. "I've got the deck." She cut it in 4 seconds. He bought her 3. 11 crew came off that freighter into the gray dawn, wrapped in blankets, alive, blinking at a sky they had been told they would never see. Chief Daniel Sutter did not come off standing. She carried the front of his litter herself and would let no one else take it. 2 years later, in a room with a great deal of gold braid, and a citation read aloud, in a voice that cracked once. A light blue ribbon was lowered over her head, and 13 white stars settled at her throat, and she stood at attention and thought about a truck that would never get finished. She had gone to a river town in the middle of the country and sat at a kitchen table across from a woman and a 9-year-old girl and a truck in the driveway with the hood still up. And she had not been able to tell them the true thing about what he did because the true thing was blacked out. She had only been able to say that he had stood between the worst thing in the world and 11 strangers, and that 11 families were whole because of it, and that his officer would carry it for the rest of her life. The girl had asked if her father was a hero. Sinclair had said yes. It was the one word of the whole visit that was not classified. She had never once said Danny Sutter's name in a courtroom. Not because she had forgotten it, because she had never yet been in a courtroom she could control. And some names you do not spend until you can protect them. The metal on the rail in that courtroom wasn't jewelry. It was a headstone she wore around her neck, and Douglas Thorne had ordered her to take it off. Back in the present, in the recycled air, Thorne overreached. He was not content with the medals on the rail. A more careful man would have let it lie. He had the members where he wanted them. The case was rolling downhill exactly the way he had built it to roll. But Douglas Thorne had spent so many years unopposed on that bench that he had lost the instinct that tells a person when they have won and should stop. Her stillness had needled him all week. Her 3-word answers had needled him. The small, unbothered way she read his room before she read his face had needled him most of all, because it told him, every time, that she was not afraid of him. And a man like Thorne could not abide a defendant who was not afraid of him. So on the 3rd morning he ruled, unprompted, reaching for it, that the accused's service record and her decorations were inadmissible and irrelevant. Theater, he called it, designed to influence the panel. He ordered it entered into the record that the accused had arrived in costume, wearing hardware, in an attempt to manipulate these proceedings. He instructed the members to disregard the woman's entire career. Ellsworth stood. He had learned, this week, exactly how to do this. Your Honor, defense objects and requests the objection be noted for the record with specificity. The Medal of Honor is a matter of law and record, not costume. The characterization is improper, and I ask that it be preserved verbatim. Noted, Thorne said, in the tone of a man flicking away a fly. Overruled. Strike the decorations. The panel will disregard the hardware. And Sinclair permitted it. That was the thing Ellsworth would remember longest. She did not fight. She could have. There were a dozen things a lesser and louder person would have said. She said none of them. She sat perfectly still and let Douglas Thorne say it all. Every improper word, every abuse of the bench. And for the first time in 3 days, she turned her head and looked directly at the judge. And she smiled. It was small. It was almost nothing. It did not reach for anything. It was the smile of a person who has been waiting a long time for an opponent to step onto a particular square, and has just watched him put his whole weight down on it. Let the record show, she said softly, that he said that. Ellsworth caught the smile and understood it all at once, the way you understand a chessboard, a move too late to be proud of yourself. She had not been failing to stop the trial. She had been letting the trial build the record. Clean, verbatim, witnessed, that would end the men who built it. Every abuse Thorne committed, she had let him commit, because a court reporter was taking it all down. She had understood from the first morning that she could not win this room by fighting it. The room was rigged. So she had done the only thing a person of her particular discipline could do. She had stopped trying to stop the device and started making sure it recorded its own wiring. Thorne thought he was burying her. He was signing a confession, one improper ruling at a time, in front of 7 witnesses and a stenographer, and she had simply declined to interrupt him. That, Ellsworth realized, was what the render safe looked like on dry land. She had not diffused the trial. She had let it run exactly long enough to catch the hand that built it. Out in the corridor, a court staffer's phone lit and did not go dark. The bailiff, near the door, straightened without knowing why. Sinclair's eyes went to the doors and stayed there. Thorne reached for his gavel to move the members along, and outside the courtroom, a set of footsteps stopped. Hard shoes, a great many of them, coming to a halt at once, in a single unhurried unison sound, like a wave setting itself down on a beach. The doors opened. "All rise." The bailiff's voice cracked the room to its feet, but half the room was already rising, because the old chiefs in the gallery were up before the word finished, spines straightening off years, hands going flat to their trouser seams. They knew, from the sound of those footsteps, what was coming through the door. Admiral Raymond Stockton walked into the courtroom. 4 stars, 59 years old, commander of the fleet, the man the fleet meant when it said, the fleet admiral. The admiral over all of it, a figure most of the officers in that room had only ever seen at a distance on a stage. He came in without hurry, a small staff behind him, and the temperature of the room changed the way the air changes before weather. There is a thing that happens when true authority enters a room that has been ruled all week by a small man playing at it. The counterfeit is suddenly visible as counterfeit. For 3 days, Douglas Thorne had been the largest force in that courtroom. It took Raymond Stockton exactly 1 step across the threshold to make him the smallest. Even Thorne, halfway out of his chair, seemed to shrink an inch inside his robe, the way a man shrinks when the person he has been imitating walks in and sees him doing it. Stockton did not look at the accused first. He looked at the bench. "Captain Thorne." His voice was quiet, and it carried to the corners. "This proceeding is halted. Now, you will not touch that gavel again." "Admiral, this is my courtroom, and It was your courtroom," Stockton said, and crossed to the rail. He stopped in front of the piece of varnished oak, where a light blue ribbon lay alone, apart from the other medals, exactly where she had placed it 3 days before. And the commander of the fleet, who did not, as a rule, do things with his own hands, bent and lifted the Medal of Honor off the wood with 2 fingers, the way you lift something sacred, and he turned to face the room, holding it up so every member of the panel could see the 13 white stars. "Attention to the Medal of Honor," he said. The room came to attention, all of it, the members, the bailiff, the gallery, even, a beat late and shaking, Douglas Thorne. "This officer," Stockton said, "is Commander Eleanor Sinclair, call sign Riptide. In 2019 she was ordered, from a screen, by a man who was not on that deck, to take an action that would have detonated a vessel-borne device with 11 of my sailors and merchant crew locked in the forward hold. She refused that order because it was unlawful and it was wrong, and she went forward and rendered that device safe with her own hands, and she brought 11 people home. She lost a chief doing it, Chief Daniel Sutter. She has never said his name in a room she couldn't protect. She can say it in this one now." He let that sit. Then he turned and looked at the 7 officers in the members' box, and when he spoke to them his voice was not unkind, which somehow made it land harder. "You were going to convict her," he said. "Not because you were bad officers, because you were handed a clean story and denied the single fact that would have broken it in half. That is exactly how it is done. Remember this room the next time a case arrives on your desk, already tidy." Thorne's face did the whole terrible journey while the Admiral spoke. Confusion first, a man trying to fit new information into an old certainty. Then disbelief, a small shake of the head. Then recognition, as he understood at last what had been lying on his rail all week, and whose trial he had actually been running. Then horror, plain and total, as he understood what that meant for him. And in the gallery, in the 2nd row, a man in a rear admiral's uniform who had come to watch his own plan land went the color of paper. Stockton turned to him. "Rear Admiral Gordon Blaine, the order was yours. The scrubbed after action was yours. The timing of these charges, referred 11 days before Commander Sinclair was to testify to the Fleet Review Board about your conduct, was yours. He did not raise his voice. He never needed to. Master-at-Arms. Admiral, Thorne tried, and there was no paragraph left in him now, only a single strangled fragment. Admiral, I didn't know. You'll have your own courtroom, Captain, Stockton said. He crossed to Sinclair, and he did not order her to do anything. He lifted the light blue ribbon and gently put it back over her head, where it belonged, and the star settled at her throat. Then Admiral Raymond Stockton, 4 stars, commander of the fleet, stepped back and rendered her a salute, and behind him, in a wave that started with the old chiefs and rolled forward through the members and the staff and the whole exhausted room, everyone who could raise a hand raised it. For the length of one held breath, the entire court stood at attention for the woman it had spent a week trying to break. After that, the case did not so much collapse as evaporate. Stockton's staff put the Fleet Review's finding on the record in plain language. Blaine's 2019 order, the paragraphs he had ordered, blacked out of the after-action, the 11-day timing of the referral. The machine that had been built to convict her came apart at every joint, because every joint had the same fingerprints, and now the lights were on. Blaine was walked out of the gallery by the Master-at-Arms to face a proceeding of his own, a real one this time, in front of people who could not be steered. He did not go quietly at first. He started a sentence about his rank, about how many years he had given, about how a decision made under pressure at sea should not be judged from a chair. No one in the room answered him. He had, after all, judged a decision made under fire from a chair 500 miles away, and everyone in the room now knew it, and the silence he walked out into was the sound of that fact landing on him. Thorne was relieved from the bench where he sat and referred for his own conduct, the verbatim record of every abuse he had committed, preserved exactly as Sinclair had let him make it. Every improper ruling, every strike, every sneer, all of it dated and witnessed and read back later by people he could not intimidate. And Lieutenant Commander Paige Alcott stood up. She did not have to. She could have sat in the wreck of the government's case and said nothing and let the dismissal come down from above. Instead, the prosecutor got to her feet, and her voice was steady even though her hands were not. The government moves to dismiss all charges and specifications against Commander Sinclair, she said, with prejudice. A pause, and the government notes for the record that it should have seen this sooner. I should have seen it sooner. I apologize to the commander. Sinclair inclined her head, a small, exact motion, accepting the thing without making the woman pay any more for it. She turned to Ellsworth. The young lieutenant looked wrung out, 3 days older than his whole career. You kept the record clean, she told him. Every objection, in order, verbatim. You didn't try to win it. You kept the floor clean so someone could stand on it. She almost smiled. That is the hardest thing to do in a courtroom, Lieutenant. And it is the thing that mattered. Remember that you could do it. There is a particular feeling that comes when a room finally stands up for the right person. When the thing that was upside down turns over and the weight lands where it always should have. If this story gave you that feeling, hold on to it and subscribe to Honor Tales, so you're in the room the next time it happens. Then the courtroom emptied. The members filed out. The staff gathered their pages. The gallery thinned, the old chiefs going last, each of them pausing at the aisle to come to attention one more time before they left. And at the end of it, Commander Eleanor Sinclair stood alone in a quiet room full of empty chairs. The gray afternoon light came flat through the high windows and lay across the empty members' box, the empty bench, the rail, She stood alone in the middle of it for a while, a woman in service dress blue, in a room that had spent a week trying to take her apart, and had, in the end, only managed to take itself apart around her. She reached up and lifted the Medal of Honor off her own neck. And she set it on the rail one last time, the varnished oak where Thorne had ordered it taken off. And this time, she set it there for the man who was not present to wear his own. She looked at it for a long moment in the still, gray light. "That one was yours, Danny," she said, to the empty room. His name, spoken aloud, finally, in a courtroom she controlled. "I told you I'd say it somewhere they couldn't take it back." Her phone buzzed once in her pocket. She looked at the screen. A number that should not have existed. A message from a man the fleet had listed 4 years ago as lost. 3 words of a coded greeting only 2 living people knew. And then a photograph. A dark-hulled dhow, running lights off, riding low in a narrow strait she recognized without needing the caption. And 1 word beneath it. Bab el-Mandeb, the Red Sea, the Narrows, and someone down there, dark and low and waiting, who had just told Riptide he was still breathing. She looked once more at the medal on the rail. Then she picked it up, put it back where it belonged, and walked out of the courtroom no one would ever again ask her to undress in. Every soldier carries a story that few ever hear. Listen with your heart. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to Honor Tales for more.